Great. Join in our blessing for studying Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah hafok ba la'asok b'divrei Torah yedadai Yadadai-dai-dai-dai-dai. Yadadai-dai-dai-dai-dai. Yadadai-dai-dai-dai. Can everyone see this okay?
Yeah.
And I apologize if there's some noise in the background. My son is homesick with the flu. He's almost better, but he is homesick. So if you hear stuff in the background, that's probably why. So let's dive into this week's Haftarah portion, which is from the Book of Kings. And this is the last of the books of the former prophets. So like there's two different sections in the prophets and the Nevi'im. And the first section is Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and then 1st and 2nd Kings. So that's like the first section of the Nevi'im, the prophets. And then in the second section, which we've been spending some time in already, are the 15 books of the later prophets: Isaiah and Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, and so on. There's a lot of them there. And my guess is that many of these names will be familiar to you, but there might be a few in there that maybe aren't so familiar yet, and we will get to some of them over the course of this year. So the Book of Kings begins with the impending death of King David, who died around 961 BCE. This book goes until the fall of the Judean monarchy and the temple's destruction in 586 B. It actually goes a little bit beyond it, concluding around the year 561 BCE with the rise of the Babylonian king Evil-Merodach. How's that for a name? So that's how Kings will end. We're not going to that. Our portion today is only on the first verses of Kings. We start with 1 Kings verse 1, and it's the entirety of the first chapter. But if you'll notice in our text sheet, I actually included a little bit from the second chapter as well, and we'll see why. So at the time that this book starts, the northern and the southern kingdoms of Israel are still united under David's rule. If you remember a few weeks ago, we had talked about that when his son rose to power, there were all sorts of issues that arose, and that's when the two had split. Really, reading this today gives us a little bit of context as to what was going on at that point that led to that split. So this week's Haftarah takes place just in the very, very days before David's death. When Moses died at the end of Deuteronomy. Joshua dies at the end of the book of Joshua. Saul at the end of Samuel. But David's death doesn't occur at the end of 2 Samuel, as we think it might. Instead, it's deferred to the very beginning of Kings. And so we'll talk about why potentially that is. Let me make this slightly smaller. Is this still big enough to read?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so is there anyone who wants to just read these first 4 lines? I know there's a lot of names and funky names in here. It is okay. If it's hard to read it, just do your best and all is well. Any takers?
I can start.
Thank you, Irv.
King David was now old, advanced in years, and though they covered him with bedclothes, he never felt warm. His courtiers said to him, "Let a young virgin be sought for my lord king to wait upon your majesty and be his attendant, and let her lie in your bosom, and my lord the king will be warm." So they looked for a beautiful girl throughout the territory of Israel. They found Abishag, the Shunammite, and brought her to the king. The girl was exceedingly beautiful. She became the king's attendant and waited upon him, but the king was not intimate with her.
Okay, so what do you make of these verses? This is how we're talking about the end of David's life.
He sounds old.
He sounds old. Well, it
Well,
says
I
King
mean,
David was now old. So
Yeah, I mean, the young woman was brought to him, and it didn't cause him to remember when he was young in the past and do whatever he did.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
putting it, in a very polite way.
Uh-huh. Right, because David, as we know, was, he had many, many different women in his life. He had many different wives. There's some kind of not nice things that he did along the way, right? Including, as we'll get to a little bit later, that he thought Bathsheba was really beautiful. And so what did he do? He took Bathsheba as his own and worked his kingly magic to make sure that her husband was killed in battle, right? Not the nicest thing to do in the world, but he did that.
Sent her husband out to be killed.
Exactly. Put him in the front lines. Yeah. Cornelia, did you want to say something? And then Jessica.
Yeah. So I guess given what you just said, this seems to me a somewhat a contrasting view, maybe not so much of David, but of how he's treated, the people treating him. I wonder how common or uncommon it is for literature at this time, writing, to show so much compassion and empathy. That's what I noticed. Like, he doesn't feel warm because he's old. That struck me. And then they're trying to help him really in a way by bringing in this woman. I mean, not just give him sexual excitement, but make him warm. That's sort of, I want to say, touching. Yeah. So that's, I wonder if that kind of writing is new and unusual at this time.
Yeah. Yeah. Jessica, go ahead. It's a good question, Cornelia.
Well, that's interesting. What Cornelia's remarks sort of changed what I was going to say. He never felt warm could be taken in a sexual sense, which is why they bring him a young virgin instead of a heap of coals to put, under his blankets to keep him warm.
Yeah.
Also, I was going to say that David and Abishag don't speak. I mean, we don't hear him. He's the big manipulator, the big guy who makes everything happen, but now he says nothing. And then Abishag, well, typical, I guess, of a woman being brought into a situation, we know nothing about her, and she says nothing, except she was exceedingly beautiful. That's the important thing.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's important to note for sure. Yeah, Jay.
First thing that came into my head when we started reading this was when we talk about all of our biblical heroes, I think it's amazing that our heroes are human. They make the same mistakes we do. A lot of times when we read books and literature, we like to read things that are different than who we are. And in our Torah and Haftarah, we read exactly who we are. And I think it's important for us to see that idea of David was just as human as the rest of us. And now, does that mean I agree with what David did? No, but he's just as human as the rest of us.
So important. And this These texts will teach us that lesson time and time again, won't they? So this is a good example of that. Is there anyone else that I just don't see? Because I can only see 4 people at a time.
Well, he could have had the affection for her as a daughter or a family member and not a sexual object.
Yeah, so maybe he wanted warmth of connection, but it specifically is pointing out this was not a sexual thing because we know David's reputation, right? Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure he had many options if he did want it.
I'm sure he did. Yes. He also had 4 wives. So let's go forward into these verses. And the reason I brought these verses in is because it does actually talk about his death. That's why I'm bringing them in. This actually are the verses right after this week's Haftarah portion. So I'll just read this really quickly. So when David's life was drawing to a close, he instructed his son Solomon as follows. I am going the way of all the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man. Keep the charge of the eternal your God, walking in God's ways and following God's laws, God's commandments, God's rules, God's admonitions as recorded in the teaching of Moses, in order that you may succeed in whatever you undertake and wherever you turn. Then God will fulfill the promise that God made concerning me. If your descendants are scrupulous in their conduct and walk before me faithfully with all your heart and soul, your line on the throne of Israel shall never end. So David slept with his fathers, and he was buried in the city of David. So that's the very end of David's life. And as we'll see, there's some controversy that will come before this beginning and of 1 Kings and David's death. But I want us to hold these texts right here. And if there's any questions or comments, feel free to kind of speak up, because I want to contrast this with our Torah portion for this week, which shares some similarities, but also has some notable differences. Are there any questions before we do that? Yeah, Jessica.
Well, not a question, but that doesn't sound like David. It sounds like more like Moses telling the people what to do in Deuteronomy. Keep the charge of the Lord and blah, 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 his rules, etc. So I wonder if this was stuck in there. Because presumably David was so old that he needed to be warmed by a virgin, and he wasn't talking very much.
But he
So
probably knew these were some of his last words, and he wanted to impart these teachings and principles to his son.
Yeah. And as many of us know who have been there with someone in their very last days of life, very often someone will rally at the very end and be able to express things that they hadn't been able to express in the days prior. Shelley, I'm sure you can speak to this since you worked as a chaplain for quite a while.
Just when you think that everything is over, it's not. And I've had that experience with patients, but also with my own family members. My grandmother in particular, I remember she was really out of it. And then we gathered the family around her bed, and she started, kind of funny in a way, because she was a, what do you call it? She would collect clothes. She was like a fashion person. But at any rate, she told us all what to wear at the end. All of a sudden, here's this woman dying, and she perks up and she tells us what to read and what not to read, that we shouldn't wear this and we should wear that, and then she dies. So it's, people rally at the end.
Yeah. But your point about this being different kind of language than we're used to hearing from David is a really good point. Like, what is it that spurred this on?
Yeah.
So let's hold that and let's look at Genesis 23. This is how our Torah portion begins this week. So the Torah portion is called Chaye Sarah, meaning the life, or actually more specifically, the lives of Sarah in the plural, which makes the rabbis come up with all sorts of different theories of what that could mean, that it's in the plural. But it starts with Sarah's death. just like our Haftarah portion, it starts with someone really important dying. Says Sarah's lifetime, the span of Sarah's life came to 127 years. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham proceeded to mourn for Sarah and to bewail her. So if we look at this text here, how is that similar? And how is that different from the end of David's life? Yeah, Jessica, please.
Ooh, there's no kingdom and there's no power to pass on. That I think that, well, there is a power which is in the covenant, which is in the succession of the, but there's no kingdom, and it's a whole different power play. And there's no one vying for the, well, that wasn't true, was it?
No, there really
Oh.
isn't anyone vying for Sarah's position. We'll look at the verses after,
Or-
but
Yeah, I was thinking ahead to Isaac and Esau, and there was competition there for the blessing, but there was no one vying for the blessing at this point.
right.
So that,
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Brian.
I can't see the other text still, but I think one of the main differences would probably be that it actually talks about someone mourning her, which it doesn't really seem to happen in David's life, and which could be seen as a consequence of how he lived his life. Like, if you guys talk about how lack of warmth, as far as connection and stuff, you can also see that maybe in his last dying breaths where, he's trying to impart this wisdom on his son, and it doesn't really indicate that any wife or son or other people who probably are a little upset with the way he lived his life are there actually mourning his death.
That's a really good point.
Another, I think, interesting thing is I don't believe Sarah spoke to Abraham. There was no communication after Isaac, the Isaac. So unlike David, she did not speak or give anyone else a charge to do anything, and there was nothing there. It was just, I guess he heard about it and then he decided to mourn.
Yeah, so there was no ethical will, because we do kind of have an ethical will from David here, but you're right, Sarah doesn't have that chance. Yeah, go ahead.
Just something small, but no one's taking care of her. There's no attendant there. No one mentions really how she's feeling at all. And it's Abraham, and he's going to mourn for her, but her feelings, her needs, nobody's attending to anything like that. And the writer's not writing about it either.
Yeah, we see the gender disparity, certainly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, please.
I think that's the difference for me is that David's death is more about it's a communal death. He's representing the community. I feel reading this, there's a tremendous intimacy between Abraham and Sarah and how he's mourning her. It's between him and her, and how he's going to bury her, and how he's dickering with whoever he's dickering with on where to get the burial plot, and how there's a lot of effort that's going into that, but it's very intimate. She doesn't seem to represent, only through him does she represent the community. So it's between the two of them. So it feels intimate to me. Yeah.
Yeah, that gets back to, the bewailing her, the emotion that is so clear in the text, which is actually not very common in the Torah, that we get that kind of an emotion. And here we really do. You okay, buddy? You okay? Okay. Yeah, Jessica, go ahead. Oh, you're muted. We can't hear you
Yeah.
yet. There we go.
I was just looking at the Hebrew, and the last word in verse 2, in 23:2, Veliv Kota. Why is the kaf? There's always a reason for these things. Why is the kaf tiny or smaller than the other?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I've studied it before and I'm not remembering the answer for it, but I'm going to take out my commentary to see if it can refresh my memory. And feel free always to bring any commentaries that you have to this study, because there's lots of great commentaries out there. Let me just look. 23:2. You're right. This is never like, there's always a reason. This does not say anything. Okay, this particular commentary is not giving me anything. I can let you know later. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Couldn't fit it on the line.
Somehow I don't think that's it though, Irv.
Which commentary were you looking in, Rabbi?
I was just quickly looking in the Plout Bamberger commentary over here just to see, because I happen to have it handy. Yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is what I can do. Can you still see this text? What I'm doing as I'm doing it?
Yeah.
Do you see browse the library up on top?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to try it this way. So this is Safaria. This is how you can find text yourself anytime you want to do that, or commentaries anytime. We're in the book of Genesis. If you go down, it goes by Torah portion. So I'm going into the Torah portion, Chaye Sarah. It's at the very beginning.
Yeah.
And if you click on that verse, you can actually click on all of the commentary that Safaria has. This is not comprehensive of all commentary everywhere, quite obviously, but it does have quite a lot of commentary. And I'm curious if there is something that might strike us. That's not it. Yeah, this might be something that we just can't do right now because there's just way too much commentary to try to go through it all. And it picks up on different parts of the verse. So I'm trying to find things, and specifically on the part of the verse that we're looking at. Most of these are earlier on in the verse. Eulogize. It's about yeah, I think I'm just going to have to look this up later because it's a little bit too complicated of a thing to try to go through all these commentaries now. But anytime you want to go through these and look up different commentaries, all you have to do is click on the verse, and then you have various options as the commentary you can look at. If there's a specific person you want to look at, or if you want to look at Hasidic text and things like that relating to it, or Talmud text relating to a verse, there is a wide array of possibilities here. I'm going to give one last look at Rashi, because Rashi is often a really good place to go just to see. This does not speak to it. So I will have to let you know later. But it's a really, really, really good question. Is there anyone else who wanted to say something? Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to ask, can you repeat the question again, that, what the significance of that question?
Oh, what we're just looking up?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, so Jessica pointed out that right here, that letter is smaller than all the rest.
Ah, okay.
And whenever a letter is smaller than the rest, there's always a reason for it.
Oh, okay.
I can't recall what the reason is. So I was trying to see if I could find that really quickly, but I'm going to have to go through my notes and figure that out later.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
They were running short of ink at the time.
Yes, I'm sure that's it too.
Well, we finally had somebody who stumped the rabbi today.
Yeah, I just can't recall. It's such a good question though. So we'll go into it. I also wanted to bring in a few more verses from this week's Torah portion as opposed to Haftarah portion. So this is after Sarah died, right after those verses that we just read, right? And it says, Vayakom Avraham, Abraham wakes up and he rises from beside Meto, his dead. The way that that's written is kind of interesting. And he spoke to the Hittites and said to the Hittites, I am a ger, I am a resident alien among you. Sell me this burial site among you that I might remove my dead for burial. And the Hittites replied to Abraham, saying, hear us, you are the elect of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold this burial place from you for burying your dead. Thereupon Abraham bowed low to the landowning citizens, the Hittites, and he said to them, if it is your wish that I remove my dead for burial, you must agree to intercede for me with Ephron, son of Zahor. Let him sell me the cave of Machpelah that he owns, which is at the edge of his land. Let him sell it to me at full price for a burial site in your midst. Ephron was present among the Hittites. So Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites in the assembly in the town's gate, saying, no, my lord, hear me. I will give you the field and give you the cave that's in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. Then Abraham bowed low before the landowning citizens and spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the landowning citizens, saying, if only you would hear me out, let me pay the price of the land accepted for me, that I might bury my dead there. And Ephron replied to Abraham, saying to him, my lord, do hear me. A piece of land is worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Go and bury your dead. And Abraham accepted Ephron's terms. Abraham paid out to Ephron the money that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver at the going merchant's rate, or at least at the stated merchant's rate. There's some commentary saying that he actually bumped that price up quite a lot for his own benefit. But why do you think these are the verses that follow Sarah's death? What's going on in these verses?
Is it maybe that if he accepted the land for free, he would owe them a favor later on, something of that sort? So he wanted to pay something for it as if as in a contract, this for that, you know.
Okay, so yeah, like a political move. I don't want to owe you something. I don't want to have that hanging over my head.
Okay.
Yeah, any other thoughts on this?
Well, is this inserted here perhaps to show possession of the land? We didn't just conquer it, we bought it. It's ours, so there, we have title to it.
Yeah, this is the first time, right, that there actually is some ownership.
Because it seems like a very businesslike few verses following Abraham's wailing after the death of his wife. So I wonder if this was stuck in there at some other time, redacted in for some reason.
Yeah, go ahead, Sally.
I think he doesn't want to be an alien anymore. He wants to belong, and he wants his wife to be in a land that he owns, and he wants her to belong. And I think it's very moving. The fact that he's taking ownership and he wants to be, this is his land. It's pretty powerful. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really powerful that these are these active pieces of, one, if you don't own the land, then someone else owns the place where she's buried. And whatever they do in the future, you have no right to say anything about it, right? So there's this like giving up of control if you don't own the land. And the second is, yeah, they're strangers. They've been strangers, resident aliens for so long. What does it mean to be in the promised land and to actually be buried there in the promised land and land that you own? So it's these really practical pieces that factor in here. And we're going to see that in the Haftarah portion as well. Any other comments or questions before we go forward back to our Haftarah? Yeah, Cornelia.
I have a comment and a question. I was wondering about the cave. Was that considered a desirable place to be buried in a cave? What is the meaning of having a cave as a place for burial?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And there are lots of burials in caves.
Yeah.
I think because you don't have to worry about the elements in the same way.
That's
I
right.
think that's part of it.
Right.
But in many cultures, there is this idea of like burying in caves or underground. I mean, we see it with like tombs and things like that. In the Middle East, there's a lot of that. It's also a marker, right? If you're in the middle of a desert and you're buried in the middle of the desert, it might be kind of hard to know where the burial spot is. But a cave is a cave. It's not going anywhere.
Well,
Thank you.
if we're born and surrounded by the womb, and then we die, we're surrounded by a cave. It's, as you said, like protection, or it's an area that's just for them.
That's a beautiful circle of life kind of visual. It is.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wonder if there's more references to that in other places, because that makes perfect sense. So here, after Sarah dies, we have bewailing, and we have this very real concern to buy land and to bury her in this respectful way. What happens when David is dying? Well, there is a whole lot of fighting. So a few things that we just need to know before we go into this portion. And we'll go back and forth to this because there's a lot of names being thrown out here, and this might just be helpful stuff to have on the side. So Adonijah is David's fourth son, okay? His older three brothers had already died. So he is the oldest living son at this moment. That's really important to know. His mother was Haggith. That's his mother's name, okay? Or Haggit, as it has here in the Hebrew. Okay, Joab was a warrior, and he was incredibly loyal to David. Everyone knew how loyal he was to King David, and so he brings that feeling of loyalty along with him. He went into battle many times for David. Abithar is a priest, obviously with a huge religious backing, so he brings a kind of gravitas along with him. Zadok was a custodian of the ark. Think Levites and how they took care of sacred things. So he's someone of great importance as well. Benaiah is the chief of the palace guard. Okay. And the prophet Natan very much served as David's conscience a lot of the time. He was the one who rebuked David after he had an affair with Bathsheba and killed off the husband. Not that other people weren't critical of that for obvious reasons, people should have been, but Natan really did serve in many ways as his conscience. And David took his words to heart. He really did. So knowing all of those things, and we can go back up to them if people need reminders of them, let's begin to read what happens. Does anyone want to read some of this, or are there too many crazy names that you want me to do it? Okay, I'll read it. No pressure. It's all good. So now Adonijah, the son of Haggit, went about boasting, "I will be king." He provided himself with chariots and horses and an escort of 50 outrunners. Remember, David is not yet dead. We just know that David is getting older and that David can't be warmed up, right? Those 4 verses are the only verses that we got so far. So he's proclaiming that he will be king and is getting all of this stuff for himself. His father had never scolded him. Why did you do that? He was the one born after Absalom, and like him, he was very handsome. He conferred with Joab, son of Zeruiah, and the priest Abiathar, and they supported Adonijah. So remember, Joab is the warrior, right? This great warrior for David, and Abiathar is this priest, the religious backing. Okay, but the priest Zadok, Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, and the prophet Natan, Shimi and Ray. So this is kind of interesting Hebrew here that we'll get back to. And David's own fighting men did not side with Adonijah. So there is this conflict that is brewing. We see it. Now going back to this, Shimei and Ray. So let's look at the Hebrew right here. It's right there. This word, Rei, is very similar to the word for neighbor or friend, okay? So there are some commentaries that this is actually referring to someone named Shimi, who is in the official position of friend of the king. And there actually was this position, some of the commentaries talk about. So it might not actually be 2 people. It might just be saying that this is someone who is in the friend of the king role. All right. Let's keep going. Adonijah made a sacrificial feast of sheep and oxen and fatlings at the Zoheleth stone, which is near En Rogel. He invited all of his brother princes and all of the king's courtiers of the tribe of Judah. But he did not invite the prophet Natan or Benaiah or the fighting men or his brother Solomon. Okay, so let's just stop right here. What is going on here, and what do we learn about all of the players? What do we learn about Adonijah from this text? Someone we want to be best friends with?
It's a coup. He's basically, he doesn't want to invite them because he's taking it from them. He wants to steal it. So it's a family coup. So internal.
Rabbi,
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go on. I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to ask the name Shim-E, the Shin Mem Ayin, isn't the root of Shema?
It is. Yeah, to hear, to listen. Mm-hmm.
Does that mean anything? I mean, everything means something.
Yeah.
Is he a listener?
Right, someone at the king's ear, right?
Oh, right. That's an expression. Yeah.
I have a tiny question. This priest Zadok, is that in any way related to Tzaddik, like a wise person, because he controls the ark, it said earlier, this Zadok?
Yeah, actually, look right there. There it is. It is absolutely related to Tzedek
Okay, thank you.
and tzedakah, righteousness. Yeah. Great question. These names are very telling about who people are, exactly. Okay, so obviously, Adonijah is not a man of humility, right? He's pretty boastful. He also, he is the oldest of the sons. So according to the way that most things went at that time, it actually would normally go to him. So there's a question about whether he is being presumptuous here or not. And it's really not possible to know if he is fully, though clearly these clues about ignoring people and the kind of conflict that is arising, it seems to indicate that there's more pieces to the puzzle than we're getting just in this text here. Whoops. Yeah, Jessica. Oh, you're muted. We can't hear you yet.
Right, sorry. It said that that David's own fighting men, including Nathan, did not side with Adonijah, but then later on it said that he didn't, at the end it said he didn't invite them. So was that because he knew they weren't on his side, or did they not side with him because they weren't invited? Because they disapproved of what he was doing?
Yeah, we don't know if the order is a little bit mixed up here. It's a really good question. If we go by the order of the text, then they saw him acting in this presumptuous way of, I'm taking control. I'm going to do all these things. And I'm not caring for my father, by the way, who's on his deathbed. I'm not worried about that. I'm more worried about making sure that I'm boasting that I'll be king and that I have my chariots and horses and all of these different things. That's what I care about, not my dad, right?
I have a problem with Joab.
Mhm.
It said previously he was very, very loyal to David. If I remember my Tanakh well, David has Joab killed later.
I don't think that's right.
I think it is. I think if you go past Kings 1 and you go to,
But David dies a few verses later.
yeah, but he asked his son Solomon to kill Joab.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
That's always been a mystery to me.
Yeah, but look at this text though. So Joab is siding with Adonijah, right? So Joab is kind of, well, let's go a little further in the text because then that'll make a lot more sense.
Okay.
All
I
right.
always had a problem with Joab. Oh.
Yeah. So let's look at the verses that follow. So then Natan, the priest, or not the priest, the prophet, sorry, said to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother. So that's the Bathsheba that he had seen from a distance, who he had the affair with and who he later married. You must have heard that Adonijah, son of Haggith, has assumed the kingship without the knowledge of our Lord David. So David is totally unaware of what's going on according to this, right? Now take my advice so that you may save your life and the life of your son Solomon. Go immediately to King David and say to him, did not you, O Lord King, swear to your maidservant, your son Solomon shall succeed me as king, and he shall sit upon my throne? Then why has Adonijah become king? While you are still there talking with the king, I will come in after you and confirm your words. So Bathsheba went to the king in his chamber. The king was very old, and Abishag, the Shunammite, that same beautiful woman from before, was waiting on the king. Bathsheba bowed low in homage to the king, and the king asked, what troubles you? She answered him, my lord, you yourself swore to your maidservant, by the eternal your God, your son Solomon shall succeed me as king, and he shall sit upon my throne. And yet now, yet now Adonijah has become king, and you, my lord the king, know nothing about it. He has prepared a sacrificial feast of many oxen, fatlings, and sheep, and he has invited all of the king's sons and Abiathar the priest and Joab, the commander of the army, but he has not invited your servant Solomon. And so the eyes of all Israel are upon you, O Lord King, to tell them who shall succeed my lord on the throne. Otherwise, when my lord the king lies down with his fathers, which is of course the euphemism for died, my son Solomon and I will be regarded as traitors. She was still talking to the king when the prophet Natan arrived. They announced to the king, the prophet Natan is here, and he entered the king's presence. Bowing low to the king with his face to the ground, Natan said, O Lord King, you must have said, Adonijah shall succeed me as king, and he shall sit upon my throne. For he has gone down today and prepared a sacrificial feast of great many oxen, fatlings, and sheep. He has invited all the king's sons and the army officers and Abiathar the priest. At this very moment, they are eating and drinking with him, and they are shouting, Long live Adonijah. But he did not invite me, your servant, or the priest Zadok or Benaiah, son of Yehoiada, or your servant Solomon. Can this decision have come from my lord the king without your telling your servant who is to succeed to the throne of my lord the king? So the plot thickens a little bit, right? What do we learn from this text?
Well, we learn, at least I think I'm learning that the jealousy, lack of morality, disrespect for parents and their wishes, selfishness existed then and still exists today in different ways, being human beings,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
That's true. Yeah. Anyone have anything else they want to add?
I'm struck by the fact that women have power. That this, how do you pronounce? I miss Bathsheba.
Bathsheba. Yeah.
Okay. That she has power, and that, you know, she's reminding him of his promises. And this is really powerful too. I mean, she's a woman coming to him. She's not even really sleeping with him or in his life per se in the same way that she was back in the day, but she still has this tremendous power to change things up, to remind him, this is what you promised. I thought that was pretty cool. So
Yeah.
but we go from the beginning where the woman, it's not really that important. She's a warm body. She's coming in. She's beautiful. She's all this, you know, to help a guy die warmly, you know. But here she is coming in as a very powerful presence, you know, as a woman. I thought it was cool. So
That's a great thing to point out. Yeah, Jessica, you had your hand raised.
Oh,
Did you want to say
yeah.
something?
Good point.
Yeah, I don't know if it's important, but Bathsheba does this in the presence of Abishag. So, you know, that she knows, I don't know what she knows, but I thought that was pretty impressive. You know, she goes in there and Abishag still doesn't speak. and Bathsheba confronts him, David.
Yeah. And they also orchestrate the whole thing with Natan so that the prophet walks in the middle of it just to say, yes, this is true, right? Like they are politically savvy. There's no doubt about it. Bathsheba's a smart woman. Yeah. So we know that there had been a previous promise. We don't know whether or not Adonijah knew of that previous promise, but we know that there had been one. And so all of this is, who is it that's going to get that seat of power? That's what they're concerned about, right? But then what's really interesting is what happens after this. So let's go right here where King David speaks and says, and this goes back to your point, Shelley, right? What does he say? Summon Bathsheba. He asks for Bathsheba to come back in. She enters the king's presence and stands before the king, and the king took an oath saying, as the Lord lives, who has rescued me from every trouble, the oath I swore to you by God, the God of Israel, that your son Solomon should succeed me as king, and that he should sit upon my throne in my stead, I will fulfill this very day. Bathsheba bowed low in homage to the king with her face to the ground, and she said, may my Lord King David live forever, which is kind of a funny thing to say when he's on his deathbed and really at the end, and where they're talking about the succession of David. It's kind of a funny little thing to put in there, but there it is, right? But he doesn't say this to anyone else. He makes this promise, not even to Solomon is he making this promise. He makes this promise to Bathsheba. And so that's the end of this week's Haftarah. And that's true for both the Ashkenazi and Sephardi traditions. They both end right there with "May my Lord King David reign forever," right? Am Yisrael Chai. That's the kind of piece there. But then, and we're going to go back to some of the verses that we were looking at the very beginning of Torah study. So it says, when David's life was drawing to a close, he instructed his son Solomon as follows: "I'm going the way of all the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man. Keep the charge of the eternal your God, walking in his ways and following his laws, his commandments, his rules, his admonitions, as recorded in the teaching of Moses, in order that you might succeed in whatever you undertake and wherever you turn. Then the Eternal will fulfill the promise that God made concerning me. If your descendants are scrupulous in their conduct and walk before me faithfully with all their heart and soul, your line on the throne of Israel shall never end." Now, before I took out these other verses, now I'm adding them back in because we have some context, okay? So further, you know what Yoav, son of Zeruiah, did to me, what he did to the two commanders of Israel's forces, Abner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Jether. He killed them, shedding blood of war in peacetime, straining the girdle of his loins, so that and the scandals on his feet with the blood of war. So maybe Yoav isn't quite who we thought he was, right? It seems that David is pretty angry with him. So act in accordance with your wisdom and see that his white hair does not go down to Sheol in peace. Don't let him die peacefully, is what it's saying here. But deal gracefully with the sons of Barzillai the Gileadite, for they befriended me when I fled from your brother Absalom. Let them be among those who eat at the table. You must also deal with Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite from Baharim. He insulted me outrageously when I was on my way to Mahanaim. But he came down to meet me at the Jordan, and I swore to him by the Lord, I will not put you to the sword. So do not let him go unpunished, for you are a wise man, and you will know how to deal with him and send his gray hair down to Sheol in blood. So he wants a little bit of revenge. That's clear, right? And maybe this is what you were getting at, Larry, with Joe.
Yeah,
He doesn't
right.
outright say kill him, but
Right.
clearly he wants some vengeance there, right? So David slept with his fathers, and he was buried in the city of David. So here was this conflict, and what happens? Well, Solomon will become king. Any questions or comments on kind of how this comes together?
It's very violent,
Yes.
very violent.
I've always had my memory understanding of David really disturbed by what happens here. Almost everyone loyal to him, he winds up killing. There's insanity here, absolute insanity.
Well, Yoav ended up not being so loyal to him in the end.
That's right, but many are.
But he had been for many, many years. Right?
Yeah.
You're right. David has a dark side. There is no doubt about it.
Yes, a very dark side. I think he's almost insane.
Oh,
Yeah.
And he gets betrayed by his sons. Oh, it's terrible.
So what I want to kind of end with, we only have a few more minutes now, is I want us to go back. Oh, sorry, Brian, did you want to say something first?
No, sorry, that was a mistake.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Solomon will carry out the killing. Yeah, a little bit later on. But if we look at this last verse that I'm going to bring in, which is toward the end of our Torah portion this week, it speaks to the ways in which Sarah is remembered. So it says, Isaac then brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah. So this is Rebecca meets Isaac, and they instantly fall in love. The Torah basically says that second Rebecca saw Isaac, she fell off her camel. Like, that is what happens in the Torah. She is so struck by him, she falls off the camel. She's okay. She's all right. Very important, but she falls off the camel. The two of them just fall in love immediately. And so it says, Isaac then brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he took Rebekah as his wife. Isaac loved her and thus found comfort after his mother's death. And that is how it talks about the mourning of Isaac later on. That's the only verse, that's the only other piece that we have talking about Sarah. And so looking at these two texts, just comparing and contrasting them, how is Sarah remembered? And how is David remembered?
It depends on your age. If you're a youngster and you learn about David, you think he's all good and wonderful and brave. And later on, you find out differently.
Well, maybe, but in the text itself, how do we remember him? I don't mean the baby version, right? I mean the real true text.
Real true, very complex character, very complex.
Yeah,
Well,
how do
he's-
we remember Sarah? Sorry, go ahead, Jessica.
Well, he's the founder of the line that ultimately ends, so the Christians believe in Jesus, which is a pretty important line, I guess.
And it's the messianic line that Jews believe in.
Yeah,
That it will lead to the Messiah. Christians believe that Messiah has already come. Jews believe the Messiah hasn't yet come, but there's the shared belief that it leads to the Messiah. Yeah, what else?
About David?
About either one.
Isaac is often misunderstood. You think of him as being kind of a schlep. He was a very compassionate person. He helped relations between the early Canaanites and the Israelis.
Right, but we're talking about Sarah and David.
Sarah,
Isaac has his own stuff. It's too complicated.
Sarah,
That's for another day.
Well, Sarah, wow.
well, Sarah's mourned by people, her son and daughter-in-law performing acts of love, and David's end is acts of the sword.
Yes, excellent. Yes.
And both make mistakes. Both are very clearly imperfect.
Yes. Agreed.
Yeah,
I'm-
Shelley.
I'm wondering about David's violence at the end, whether we can't reframe that as also, he has a different role and he's trying to also protect Solomon. He's trying to protect the people that come after him. And by doing that, he needs to, I mean, in his head, he needs to get rid of these bad players to protect them. So I see him as actually being a responsible patriarch. I don't really see him as being totally violent or, and it is a complex role to be a dad and to also be a patriarch of a nation. And he knows what's coming down. And there's a certain prophetic sense about him. I know what can happen here. I need to take care of business before I die. That's how I look at that. So I'm very pragmatic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really fair. The fact that, if you remember at the very beginning of this, we were talking about how Kings begins with the death of David. Chaye Sarah begins with the death of Sarah. And I think part of the reason that happens is because we don't want these two people with their complex lives to be remembered only for those final moments. that it's an acknowledgement that they are complicated, that they lived these vibrant lives over the course of their lives. And as we mourn their deaths, we really take in the totality of who they were, and we remember to honor all of those pieces.
Mm.
So I think we have a similar message that comes from our Torah and Haftarah portions this week, if we follow that message, and that doesn't always happen.
Mhm.
So it really is kind of an interesting, like it's obvious why this Haftarah portion was picked for this Torah portion. It's not always so clear.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay.
So it is already 2:02. This time always flies way quicker than I wanted to. I hope that everyone has such a wonderful Thanksgiving. Next Thursday, as we're all cooking our turkeys or whatever it is that we enjoy, we're not going to be joining together for Torah study then, but we will be back the week after that. And yeah, I'll look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Rabbi.
Thank you.